They forged your signature. The conference room fell silent. Every face turned toward me, but not because anyone expected me to defend myself. They expected me to surrender. On the polished table lay a safety inspection report with my name stamped across the bottom. The numbers had been altered. Hazard ratings had vanished. Critical maintenance warnings had become green check marks. The plant director slowly pushed the document toward me. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm enough to be dangerous. "Did you approve this?" I looked at the report. Exactly the same edits. Exactly the same crooked signature. Exactly the same coffee stain in the corner. Even the paper crease was where I remembered it. My heartbeat remained steady, because I'd already lived through this day once. The first life had ended inside Building 3. Molten steel had burst through a failed pressure valve. 8 workers died. 27 were injured. News helicopters circled the factory for weeks. Every television station showed my face beneath one sentence. Chief Safety Engineer approved defective inspection. No one believed me. The original report had disappeared. Every backup file had been deleted. The surveillance cameras covering my office had somehow stopped recording for 37 minutes. My colleagues cried in court. We trusted Ethan. He inspected everything personally. He signed every page. Even the people I had trained testified against me. Not because they hated me, because promotions were waiting. Someone had to carry the blame. I lost everything before the explosion ever happened. My career, my reputation. My parents died believing their son had killed innocent people. In prison, I replayed every decision until I realized the truth. They hadn't merely framed me. They had needed my signature. Without it, production would never continue. Without production, no bonuses, no executive promotions, no record-breaking quarterly profits. They had stolen my report because they already knew the equipment was failing. Then came darkness, then pain, then another chance. Not awakening in childhood, not years earlier, just 5 days before the meeting. 5 days before my report would disappear. A second life, close enough to change everything, far enough to let everyone reveal themselves. Director Mason folded his hands. I'm waiting for an explanation. Across the table sat Victor Lang, production manager. Perfect smile, perfect tie, perfect liar. He leaned back with practiced confidence. Ethan has always been overly cautious, Victor said. Perhaps he forgot making these revisions. Soft laughter rippled around the room. Not cruel, comfortable. They already believed him, because they always had. Beside Victor sat Karen Wu from compliance. She lowered her eyes sympathetically. I know you've been under stress lately. Stress, another familiar word. In my previous life, they had slowly painted me as unstable before the accident even occurred. Every lie had begun with concern. Ethan looks exhausted. Maybe he needs leave. He hasn't been himself. Small comments. Tiny seeds. Until no one questioned the harvest. Director Mason sighed. So, I finally spoke. If that's the report everyone wants. I slid it back toward him. Then use it. Victor blinked. What? I won't argue. Karen frowned. You won't? No. Silence. That wasn't the answer anyone expected. In my first life, I'd shouted, demanded audits, requested digital records, accused everyone in the room. They called it panic. This time, I simply stood. If the meeting is over, I said quietly, I have maintenance rounds. Director Mason stared. You aren't defending yourself? I've answered. You admitted approving it. I said. I met Victor's eyes. Use the report you've already decided to believe. I walked toward the door. Behind me, chairs scraped across the floor. Ethan, I didn't stop, because arguing never changed the future. Only preparation did. Outside, cold autumn air filled my lungs. The factory looked exactly as I remembered. 3 production buildings. 1 administrative tower. Miles of steam pipes weaving overhead. Workers laughed during shift changes. Forklifts hummed across concrete roads. No one knew death was already walking these grounds. I took out my phone. Hidden inside an encrypted folder were photographs. Every cracked pressure gauge. Every leaking hydraulic line. Every warped valve housing. Every inspection timestamp. Not on the company's server, Not on company cameras. 3 cloud backups. 2 encrypted drives. 1 sealed envelope already mailed to an independent engineering board. In my previous life, I trusted company systems. This life, I trusted only evidence I controlled. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. Ethan. The voice belonged to Nora Hayes, an external safety auditor. She hadn't believed me in my first life until the trial ended. I'm reviewing next month's compliance schedule, she said. I'd like to visit early. In my previous life, she never made this call. I smiled faintly. You're welcome anytime. What changed? I did. She laughed softly. I'll see you Friday. Friday. One day before building 3 failed. Interesting. Perhaps fate wasn't fixed after all. As I slipped the phone into my pocket, someone stepped behind me. Victor, hands in his pockets, still smiling. You surprised me. I imagine I did. You've become reasonable. No. I looked across the factory yard. I've become patient. For the first time, his smile faltered. Victor studied my face as if searching for the frightened engineer he remembered. You know, he said, people admire confidence. They admire results. They also admire loyalty. I've always been loyal. His smile returned. Then you'll understand why today's meeting had to happen. Interesting. Not an apology. A justification. The guilty rarely confessed outright. They preferred dressing betrayal as necessity. What exactly had to happen? I asked. The company can't afford delays. There are delays because the equipment is failing. Victor shrugged. Every factory has problems. Not every factory has pressure vessels operating beyond certified limits. He looked toward Building 3. You're still exaggerating. No, I'm protecting jobs. And I'm protecting lives. He chuckled. Those 2 things aren't always compatible. There was the philosophy that had buried 8 workers in my first life. Profit first. Safety later. If later ever arrived. Victor stepped closer. I heard headquarters is considering regional promotions. I heard that too. If production records stay strong this quarter. He spread his hands casually. Several managers could move into executive positions. So that's what this is about. He smiled without denying it. I hope you won't create unnecessary complications. I won't. His eyes brightened. Good. I've already done everything I intend to do. He interpreted those words exactly as I wanted. Compliance. Acceptance. Surrender. He walked away satisfied. Only I knew the sentence meant something entirely different. By evening, I entered Building 3 alone. The machinery roared like an enormous animal refusing to die. Heat shimmered across the steel platforms. Maintenance technician Luis Ortega waved from an upper walkway. Working late again, I wanted another look at Valve 7. He climbed down. You've checked it 3 times. I know. It'll hold. I looked at the aging valve. No, it wouldn't. Not for long. Luis scratched his head. You really think it's that serious? In my first life, I had answer with technical data. Stress fractures. Metal fatigue. Thermal cycling. Numbers. This time I answered differently. I think everyone deserves to go home alive. Luis fell silent. After a moment he nodded. I'll keep an eye on it. You always do. He frowned. What? Nothing. Because Luis had died trying to shut the system down during the explosion. One of the 8 names carved into the memorial stone that would exist in another future. I refused to let myself stare too long. Saving everyone required timing. Too early. Victor would bury the evidence again. Too late. People would die. I needed the truth exposed before disaster. But after the conspiracy committed itself beyond denial. A dangerous balance. Near midnight, I returned to my office. The door wasn't fully closed. Someone had been inside. I entered quietly. Nothing appeared disturbed. The desk remained neat. The filing cabinet locked. But a coffee mug sat slightly farther left than I'd left it. Tiny changes. Enough. I unlocked the bottom drawer. The printed inspection report was gone. Exactly as expected. Instead, a duplicate sat in its place. Wrong paper stock. Wrong printer toner. Wrong staple angle. Victor's people believed theft was invisible, only because they assumed no one paid attention. I smiled faintly, then opened my laptop. The hidden camera I'd installed beneath the bookshelf loaded without hesitation. The screen showed two figures entering my office earlier that evening. Karen and a junior IT supervisor named Owen. Karen unlocked the drawer. Owen photographed every document before replacing the report. They spoke quietly. The microphone barely captured the sound. Promotion. Mason approved. Once Ethan signs, deletes server logs. I watched the recording twice. Not because I doubted it. Because in my previous life, I never had proof. Now I did. Yet I closed the video instead of sending it anywhere. Not yet. Evidence had greater power when the guilty believed they were safe. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown encrypted address. They're moving faster than expected. Inspection archive scheduled for deletion tomorrow, 8 p.m. I stared at the screen. Someone inside the company wasn't on Victor's side. Or someone wanted me to think so. Either possibility was dangerous. Outside my office window, the factory lights glowed against the night. Beautiful, orderly, peaceful, almost convincing. Anyone standing there would see only another successful manufacturing plant. I saw a countdown, and somewhere inside those buildings, another player had just stepped onto the board before I even knew their name. The message remained on my screen long after the display dimmed. They're moving faster than expected. Inspection archive scheduled for deletion tomorrow, 8 p.m. No signature, no sender, no demand, only information. In my first life, no one had warned me, which meant one thing. Someone else's future had changed too. I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself not to chase impossible theories. A second life didn't make me omniscient. It only gave me memory. Speculation had nearly destroyed me before. Evidence would not. The next morning, the factory cafeteria buzzed with ordinary conversation. Forklifts beeped outside. Coffee machines hissed. Workers joked about overtime while managers discussed production quotas. Normal. That was always the cruelest part. Disasters never announced themselves. They had inside routine. Ethan, Louise carried 2 cups of coffee toward my table. You look like you haven't slept. I've slept enough. He laughed. You always say that. You placed 1 cup in front of me. I heard about yesterday. So news travels fast. People say Director Mason humiliated you. They're right. And you're strangely calm. I've had practice. Louise frowned. I don't understand. You don't need to. He studied me for several seconds before changing the subject. My daughter's birthday is Saturday. Saturday. The day Building 3 exploded in my previous life. I kept my expression steady. How old? 8. He smiled with unmistakable pride. She wants a telescope. Then buy her one. Already did. He laughed again. I've been saving for months. His smile lingered in my mind long after he returned to his table. 8 years old. A telescope waiting at home. A father who never came back. Not this time. I silently promised myself. Not this time. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the engineering archive room. Rows of steel cabinets stretched from wall to wall. Every inspection report for the past 15 years rested here. A woman looked up from a scanner. Emily Ross, archive supervisor. Meticulous. Quiet. Often overlooked. Morning, she said. Morning. She adjusted her glasses. Need another file? No. I lower my voice. Has anyone requested access to my reports? Her fingers paused above the keyboard. That's unusual. So someone has. Emily hesitated. I probably shouldn't. You don't have to tell me who. She looked around the empty room before whispering. Production management requested authorization yesterday. Approved? They had Director Mason's signature. Of course they did. Did they take anything? Digital copies. What about originals? They're still here. For now. She looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? I considered warning her. Instead, I asked, Emily, if someone ordered you to destroy inspection archives, what would you do? She stared at me. I'd refuse, even if it cost her job. Her answer came without hesitation. Records exist for a reason. Interesting. Integrity still existed inside these walls. It had simply been buried beneath louder voices. Before leaving, I handed her a business card. My personal number. She looked surprised. If anything unusual happens, I'll call, no matter the hour. She slipped the card into her notebook. You sound worried. I am. At noon, Director Mason summoned department heads. The conference room projector displayed production graphs climbing steadily upward. Outstanding quarter, Mason announced. Our investors are pleased. Victor nodded with practiced modesty. The team's efforts deserve the credit. Karen smiled, especially everyone's willingness to stay flexible. Flexible, another harmless word carrying dangerous meaning. Mason continued. Corporate headquarters is sending an executive delegation next week. Several managers exchanged excited looks. Promotions, raises, recognition, everything balanced upon uninterrupted production. Then Mason looked directly at me. Ethan, yes, I've reviewed your recent concerns, and I've decided no additional inspections are necessary. Silence settled over the room. He wanted witnesses. He wanted my defeat to become official. Understood, I replied. Victor blinked. Karen frowned. Mason narrowed his eyes. That's all. You've made your decision. I expected objections. I've already documented my recommendations. You disagree. I do. Then argue. No. His expression hardened. Why not? Because arguments don't repair machinery. For a moment, no one spoke. The atmosphere shifted. People weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They looked uneasy. A man who stopped defending himself frightened them more than one who shouted, because calm implied certainty. After the meeting, Karen caught up with me in the hallway. Ethan, I stopped. We need to talk. Go ahead. She folded her arms. I know you're angry. I'm disappointed. That's understandable. No. I met her eyes. Understanding requires honesty. She looked away first. You've changed. I have. In the past, you trusted us. The sentence almost made me laugh. No, I trusted the work. She softened her voice. We're colleagues. Were. The single word struck harder than any accusation. Karen took a slow breath. If you're planning something, I already have. What does that mean? You'll find out. For the first time since I'd returned, genuine fear flickered across her face. At exactly 7:42 that evening, my phone vibrated. Emily. I answered immediately. They're here. Her voice shook. Who? Karen, Owen, and 2 security officers. They have authorization? Yes. They're removing archive boxes. I stood so quickly my chair rolled into the wall. Don't stop them. What? Do not interfere. But they're taking your reports. I know. They'll destroy everything. No. I grabbed my jacket. They're going to destroy what they think is everything. By the time I reached the archive building, a gray company van was already pulling away. Emily hurried toward me. I'm sorry. You did exactly what I asked. They loaded 6 boxes. I expected that. She looked completely bewildered. You expected them to steal evidence? Yes. Her eyes widened. Then why didn't you stop them? I looked at the disappearing taillights. Because thieves reveal more than stolen property. She remained silent. I continued. When innocent people hide documents, they act carefully. And guilty people, they become confident. Confidence produced mistakes. Mistakes produced proof. Emily slowly nodded, though confusion still lingered across her face. I don't understand everything. You don't have to. She hesitated. There is something else. What? She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded sticky note. I found this on the archive desk after they left. 3 handwritten words. Check cabinet 9. No signature. Again, someone was helping me, or leading me into a trap. Either way, I needed to know. Cabinet 9 stood against the far wall. Its lock had already been broken. Inside rested dozens of maintenance ledgers. Nothing unusual, until I noticed one folder placed upside down. I removed it. Hidden beneath was a thin black flash drive taped to the shelf. Emily gasped. That wasn't there before. No, someone wanted me to find it. Back in my office, I connected the drive to an isolated laptop. Encrypted. Professional grade. After entering a recovery program, one folder appeared. Private Victor. Inside were dozens of emails. Budget discussions. Maintenance delays. Bonus calculations. Then one message froze my breathing. Replace Ethan's inspection before corporate sees it. We only need production through this quarter. Valve 7 can wait until scheduled shutdown. Another reply followed. If anything happens, safety signed the approval. No names. Only company email addresses. Enough to destroy careers. Not enough to guarantee convictions. I copied every file onto 3 separate drives before disconnecting the laptop. Someone had just handed me a weapon. But why? The answer arrived sooner than expected. At 10 o'clock, someone knocked on my office door. A woman in her 60s entered quietly. Grace Holloway, the factory's retired quality director. She had officially left 6 months before my first life's disaster. Seeing her again sent a ripple through my chest. She had been one of the few people who testified in my favor. No one listened. She closed the door behind her. I was wondering how long it would take. You know about the flash drive. I prepared it. I stared. You, Grace nodded. In your first life. The words stopped my heartbeat. She looked at me with calm, tired eyes. You never got the chance to see it. The room became impossibly still. Neither of us spoke. Outside, machinery continued its endless rhythm. Inside, one impossible truth erased every assumption I had made since returning. I wasn't the only person who remembered. The office suddenly felt too small. Grace Holloway stood quietly near the door, her weathered hands folded around the handle of her cane. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't frightened. She looked relieved. I rose slowly. What did you just say? Grace met my eyes without hesitation. In your first life, she repeated softly, you never saw that flash drive. The words echoed inside my head. Not if, not perhaps, not I dreamed. She had spoken with certainty. I took a careful breath. You're saying you've lived this before. She nodded once. I remember everything. Silence settled between us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. In my previous life, Grace had retired months before the explosion. She had tried to convince investigators that the maintenance schedule had been manipulated, but without proof, she was dismissed as a sentimental former executive. She died 2 years later. Heart failure. Alone. Now she was standing in front of me. Alive. And carrying memories no one else should have possessed. Finally, I asked, when did you return? 3 weeks before you did. You knew I'd remember? I hope. Why didn't you contact me immediately? Grace looked toward the window. I needed to know whether this was truly another chance, or simply my own madness. I couldn't blame her. If our roles had been reversed, I might have doubted my own mind as well. She reached in her handbag and removed a worn notebook. I started writing everything the moment I realized. She handed it to me. Every page contained dates, equipment failures, meeting notes, names, tiny observations only someone who had actually lived those days could know. Near the center of the notebook, one sentence had been underlined twice. Never confront Victor before he believes he's won. I looked up. You learned that too. Grace gave a bitter smile. The hard way. She sat across from me. Tell me what you've changed. I summarized everything. The stolen report, the hidden cameras, the cloud backups, Emily, the anonymous messages. Grace listened without interrupting. Only after I finished did she ask, have you warned Luis? I've spoken with him. Has he agreed to leave Building 3? Not yet. She sighed. He never abandons his team. I know. He died trying to save them. I know. The room fell silent again. Neither of us needed to explain the weight behind those words. Memories were wounds that never fully closed. Grace leaned forward. Then we save him differently. How? We don't convince him. We remove his reason to stay. I frowned. She pointed toward the flash drive. Victor, understanding slowly settled over me. If Victor's scheme collapsed before Saturday, production would stop. Building 3 would shut down. Luis would never be forced to choose between duty and survival. The goal had never been proving my innocence. The goal was preventing everyone else's guilt. My phone rang. Emily. I answered immediately. Ethan. Her breathing was uneven. What's wrong? Corporate security is here. My eyes narrowed. What? They're auditing engineering. Grace straightened in her chair. When? Right now. Interesting. Corporate wasn't scheduled until next week. Someone had accelerated the timeline. Who requested the audit? I don't know. Where are they? Director Mason's office. I'll be there. As I stood, Grace caught my sleeve. Don't show them the emails. Why? Because if corporate acts too early, they'll destroy the remaining evidence. She nodded. Cornered people become desperate. She was right. Victor wasn't beaten yet. A wounded animal still had teeth. Outside Mason's office, voices echoed through the corridor. A man in a dark suit stepped into view. Silver hair, sharp eyes, measured posture. Richard Hale, vice president of operations. In my previous life, he had arrived only after the explosion. This time, he was early. His gaze settled on me. You must be Ethan Carter. I am. I'm Richard Hale. I know. His eyebrow lifted slightly. Have we met? Not yet. Before he could respond, Victor emerged from Mason's office wearing his usual confident smile. Ethan. Victor spread his arms. Perfect timing. His confidence looked genuine. Too genuine. He still believed the game belonged to him. Good. Let him. Richard Hale glanced between Victor and me. I've been reviewing recent production reports. Victor answered before I could speak. Our numbers have exceeded every projection. They have. Richard's tone remained unreadable. But headquarters also received an anonymous compliance concern. Victor's smile barely changed. Anonymous complaints happen all the time. They do. Richard looked toward me. Mr. Carter, do you have anything you'd like to add? Every eye in the hallway settled on me. Director Mason, Karen, Victor, several department managers. This was exactly the kind of moment that had ruined me in my first life. Then I had desperately tried to expose everyone. No evidence, only accusations. Now, I possessed enough evidence to destroy them. Yet I shook my head. Not today. Victor blinked. Richard studied me carefully. You have nothing to report? I've already submitted every recommendation required by my position. And if management ignored them, that would become management's responsibility. A strange silence followed. Richard didn't seem disappointed. He seemed interested. As expected, Victor said smoothly, Ethan tends to be overly cautious. I didn't respond. Richard looked at me one last time before entering the conference room. As the door closed, Victor chuckled. I thought you'd finally found your courage. I have. Then why stay silent? I met his eyes. Because the truth doesn't become stronger by arriving early. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then it disappeared. He laughed again. You always speak in riddles. No, I've simply stopped explaining things to people who have already made their choice. I walked away before he could answer. Behind me, I heard Karen whisper, Something's wrong. Victor replied, quietly, He's bluffing. I almost smiled. Keep believing that. That afternoon, I received another anonymous message. Tonight, loading dock 4. Come alone. Grace read the message without comment. Trap? I asked. Probably. You still think I should go? She nodded. If someone has been feeding us information, we need to know who. And if it's Victor? Grace's eyes hardened. Then we finally learn how desperate he truly is. Loading dock 4 sat at the edge of the factory grounds, nearly abandoned after sunset. Only one security light remained on. Wind pushed loose paper across the concrete. At exactly 9 o'clock, footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. Not Victor. Not Karen. Emily. She looked terrified. Ethan, what happened? I know who's been sending the messages. You? She shook her head immediately. No. Then who? Before she could answer, another figure stepped from the darkness. Owen, the young IT supervisor. His face was pale. His hands trembled. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. Emily looked at him with visible relief. Owen, he swallowed hard. They promised me a promotion. I know. They said nobody would get hurt. I know. His voice cracked. They lied. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a company-issued tablet. I copied everything before they deleted the servers. My heartbeat slowed. Everything. He nodded. Emails. Security logs. Camera footage. They don't know I kept it. Emily whispered. You have proof. Owen's eyes filled with shame. I helped them. He looked directly at me. I want to stop helping. Before I could answer, headlights suddenly flooded the loading dock. 3 black company SUVs rolled silently through the gate. Victor had found us. The headlights blinded us for a heartbeat. 3 black SUVs stopped in a perfect line. Their engines idled. No one stepped out immediately. Victor always preferred making people wait. It reminded them who held the power. Owen's hands shook so violently that the tablet nearly slipped from his grip. Emily whispered, "We should leave." "No," I said quietly. "They've already blocked the exit." The driver's door of the first SUV opened. Victor stepped out, adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit as though he had arrived for dinner instead of a confrontation. Karen followed. Then Director Mason. Two corporate security officers remained near the vehicles. Victor smiled. "Ethan." His voice echoed through the empty loading dock. I was wondering when our little whistleblower meeting would happen. Owen froze. "You tracked my tablet." Victor looked at him almost sympathetically. "You really thought our IT department wouldn't notice unauthorized data transfers?" Owen's face turned pale. You were never as clever as you imagined." Victor's attention shifted to me. "But you?" He shook his head with genuine admiration. "You surprised me." "I wasn't trying to." "No." He laughed softly. "You stopped arguing. You stopped complaining. You let us believe you'd given up." "I did." Victor's smile widened. "I almost respected that." Karen stepped forward. "Ethan, hand over whatever Owen copied." Emily instinctively moved closer to me. Victor noticed. "So now even archive staff have chosen sides." Emily met his gaze. "I chose the truth." His expression cooled. "The truth doesn't pay salaries." "No," Emily replied. "It protects lives." For the first time, Victor's patience cracked. "You people never understand business." I answered before anyone else could. "No, you never understood responsibility." Silence stretched between us. Then Victor sighed. "I try to solve this quietly." He looked at the security officers. "Collect the company property." The two officers began walking toward Owen. Owen backed away. "They're not company files anymore. They're stolen files," Victor corrected. "They're evidence," I said. Victor looked directly at me. "Evidence of what?" "That you knew Valve 7 was failing." For a fraction of a second, his pupils contracted. "Only for a fraction." Then he smiled again. "Can you prove that?" "I don't need to." He frowned. "You've already done it yourself." Victor laughed. Loudly. Confidently. "Ethan, you're bluffing." "I don't bluff. You've always been terrible at lying." "Fortunately, I don't have to." He looked around the loading dock. No cameras. No witnesses. No judge. Just frightened employees. He extended one hand. "Give me the tablet." Owen looked at me. Fear filled his eyes. In another life, I would have told him to run. Tonight, I simply nodded once. Owen understood. He slowly handed the tablet to Victor. Emily gasped. "Ethan." Victor accepted it with a satisfied smile. "There. See how easy that was?" He raised the tablet slightly. "This was your last chance." Then he dropped it onto the concrete. The screen shattered. He crushed it beneath his polished shoe until sparks burst from the casing. Karen let out a relieved breath. Director Mason smiled for the first time all evening. Victor looked at me triumphantly. "It's over," I quietly asked. "Is it?" He frowned. I reached into my pocket and removed my phone. One touch. The hidden camera recording from loading dock 4 streamed directly to 6 encrypted cloud servers. The red recording icon reflected in Victor's eyes. His smile disappeared. "You," he whispered. "You wanted me to destroy the evidence," he said slowly. "No, I wanted you to reveal yourself." Victor's expression changed for the first time since I had met him. Not anger, not panic, calculation. His mind raced through possibilities, searching for an escape. He pointed toward my phone. "Delete it." "No, you've recorded this illegally." "I've recorded my own conversation." Director Mason stepped forward. "Ethan, be reasonable." "I tried that." "You'll destroy this company." I looked around the loading dock. "No, the people who ignored safety warnings did that." Karen folded her arms tightly across her chest. "Nobody has died. Not yet." The words landed with crushing weight. Victor scoffed. "More fear tactics." I looked at Owen. "Tell them." Owen swallowed hard. His voice trembled. "They knew." Victor barked. "Be careful." Owen flinched. Then, for the first time since joining the company, he looked directly at Victor instead of lowering his eyes. I copied every deleted email. Victor's face hardened. I watched Karen replace Ethan's report. Karen closed her eyes. I erased security logs. Director Mason whispered, "Owen." I disabled camera recordings. His breathing became uneven. I thought. His voice cracked. I thought production would stop before anything happened. Victor took one threatening step forward. "You signed confidentiality agreements." Owen actually laughed. A broken, exhausted laugh. "I also signed criminal liability forms." Silence. Then another voice spoke from behind the SUVs. "So did everyone else." Richard Hale walked into the light. Behind him came 4 uniformed investigators. Not company security. Government industrial safety investigators. Grace followed beside them, leaning lightly on her cane. Victor stared. Richard's expression was cold. "The anonymous compliance reports reached headquarters 3 days ago." Victor looked at me. "You contacted him?" I shook my head. "No." Grace answered instead. "I did." She handed Richard a thick envelope. My retirement didn't erase 30 years of records. Richard accepted it without opening it. He already knew what was inside. "I delayed this meeting," Richard said calmly, "because I wanted to see who would destroy evidence." His eyes settled on the broken tablet. "And you exceeded expectations." The investigators stepped forward. One of them addressed Victor directly. "Production manager Victor Lang." Another looked toward Mason. "Director Samuel Mason." A third turned to Karen. "Compliance officer Karen Wu. You are all under formal investigation for document tampering, obstruction of safety compliance, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to falsify inspection records." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The factory seemed unnaturally quiet. Then emergency sirens echoed across the entire facility. A maintenance worker ran into the loading dock, breathless. "Valve 7. He struggled to breathe. It just ruptured during pressure testing." Everyone turned toward Building 3. A thick cloud of steam billowed into the night sky. The emergency shutdown system activated instantly. Production lines ground to a halt. Workers evacuated in orderly lines. No explosion, no fire, no deaths, because the building had been shut down before full operational pressure could build. Luis emerged from the evacuation line, coughing but alive. He spotted me across the yard. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. He didn't know why he was alive. I did. Victor slowly turned toward the rising steam. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "This wasn't supposed to happen." I answered quietly, "No, it was." As investigators placed handcuffs on Victor, he didn't resist. He only stared at Building 3. Watching the promotion, he had sacrificed everything for disappear into the night with the escaping steam. The factory was silent for the first time in years. Not peaceful, hollow. The familiar rumble of machinery had been replaced by the distant voices of investigators, the hiss of depressurizing pipes, and the occasional flash of emergency vehicle lights reflecting off steel walls. I stood behind the yellow safety tape outside Building 3. Luis walked toward me, still wearing his grease-stained coveralls. A white bandage wrapped around his forearm where escaping steam had burned him. He stopped a few feet away. "They said the valve burst during testing." It did. If we'd been running a full production load. Neither of us finished the sentence. "We didn't need to." Luis lowered his head. "I almost volunteered for overtime tonight." "I know." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" I searched for the right words. I knew the equipment wasn't safe. His expression softened. "So that's why you kept warning us?" "Yes." He let out a long breath. "I thought you were just being stubborn." "I've been called worse." A tired laugh escaped him. Then, without another word, he stepped forward and embraced me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the quiet gratitude of a man who had unknowingly walked away from death. When he finally stepped back, his eyes were red. "My daughter," he swallowed hard. "She'll get her telescope." I smiled for the first time in days. "She will." By sunrise, investigators had sealed half the factory. News vans crowded the entrance. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering as reporters shouted questions from behind barricades. No one knew the full story yet, but rumors spread faster than facts. Inside the administrative building, Richard Hale convened an emergency meeting. Only a handful of department heads remained. Many offices were already empty. Victor, Karen, Director Mason, gone. Their security badges had been deactivated before dawn. Richard stood at the head of the conference table. This company survived because the shutdown happened in time. No one spoke. He continued. It did not survive because our systems worked. His gaze moved slowly across the room. It survived because one engineer refused to compromise. Several people looked toward me. I shifted uncomfortably. Praise had never interested me. Results did. Richard noticed. You don't seem pleased. I'm relieved. That's all. For now. He nodded thoughtfully. Fair answer. He opened a folder. Corporate has suspended production indefinitely. Someone gasped. Richard ignored the interruption. We'll rebuild every safety protocol from the ground up. Then he turned toward me. I'd like you to lead that effort. The room fell silent. Months ago, I would have accepted immediately. In my previous life, I would have considered it redemption. This time, I shook my head. No. Richard's eyebrows lifted. No. I can't rebuild a culture that still believes safety is an obstacle. We'll change the culture. You'll try. I will. I met his eyes. But someone else should carry that responsibility. He studied me for several moments before asking quietly, what do you want instead? I looked through the conference room window toward the factory yard. Workers, families, lives. I want to make sure this never happens somewhere else. 3 weeks later, the courtroom overflowed with reporters. Not because the trial had begun, because the preliminary evidence hearing was expected to reveal how one of the country's largest manufacturing companies had concealed catastrophic safety failures. I sat in the back row, not at the witness stand, not beside prosecutors, just another observer. Exactly where I wanted to be. Victor entered wearing prison transport restraints. His expensive suits had been replaced by a plain gray uniform. He looked older, not from time, from consequence. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. Karen followed. She appeared exhausted. Director Mason no longer carried himself like an executive. His shoulders sagged under the weight of months without power. One by one, prosecutors presented the evidence. The altered inspection reports, deleted server logs, security footage, financial emails, audio recordings. Each exhibit quietly dismantled the lies that had once seemed untouchable. No dramatic confession came. None was needed. Facts spoke more clearly than anger ever could. When Owen took the witness stand, his voice shook. I believed them. He paused. They said delaying maintenance would protect everyone's jobs. The prosecutor asked, and when did you realize that wasn't true? Owen glanced toward me before answering. When the only person who had every reason to fight stayed calm. The courtroom became very still. I realized guilty people are always in a hurry. Innocent people aren't. I lowered my eyes. Those words weren't about me. They were about the lesson he had learned too late. After the hearing ended, I walked outside alone. Grace was waiting beneath a maple tree across the street. She smiled as I approached. It's finished. No. I looked back at the courthouse. It simply reached the point where truth no longer needs me. She nodded. That's the best kind of ending. For a while we stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, I asked the question that had lingered in my mind since the night she revealed her memories. Why do you think we were given another chance? Grace laughed softly. I've stopped trying to answer questions the universe refuses to explain. So have I. She looked at me carefully. Do you regret coming back? I thought about prison, the explosion, the workers who had died, Luis's daughter waiting for her telescope, Emily refusing to betray the archives, Owen choosing truth over fear. Then I thought about the quiet life waiting ahead, one no longer defined by proving my innocence. No, I said, I regret the first life. A gentle breeze carried away the last of the courtroom noise. Grace smiled. Good. So now. She tapped her cane lightly against the sidewalk. Go live the second one. 6 months later, the old factory gates remained closed. Grass had begun pushing through cracks in the concrete where freight trucks once lined up before dawn. The silence no longer felt tragic. It felt honest. The place had finally stopped pretending to be healthy. I parked across the street and stepped out of my car. There was no anger in my chest. No satisfaction either. Only distance. A temporary fence surrounded Building 3. Most of the damaged equipment had already been dismantled. Engineers in bright orange helmets walked through the structure, documenting every failure before reconstruction could begin. Someone called my name. Ethan. Luis waved from inside the gate. His smile came easier now. He wore a different company logo on his jacket. After the shutdown, several employees had been hired by safer manufacturers. Luis had become a maintenance supervisor instead of merely following impossible production schedules. He walked over carrying a long cardboard case. My daughter insisted. He handed it to me. Inside was a small brass telescope mounted on polished wood. A tiny engraved plate read, "To the man who made sure my father came home." For several seconds I couldn't speak. "I can't accept this." "You already have." Louise folded my fingers around the case. She said heroes always refuse gifts the first time. I laughed quietly. "I'm not a hero." "No." He looked toward the abandoned factory. "You were the only person who remembered what responsibility meant." We stood together in comfortable silence. Finally he asked, "Will you ever come back here?" I looked beyond the fence. "I already came back once." He frowned, not understanding. I simply smiled. "That's enough." My new office overlooked a river instead of a production floor. The sign outside the building read, "Independent Industrial Safety Institute." No shareholders. No production quotas. No executive bonuses. Only inspections, training, prevention. Richard Hale had kept his promise. He had helped establish the institute using compensation funds recovered during the company's restructuring. I had accepted one condition: complete independence. If I found dangerous conditions, no executive could bury the report. Ever. Emily now managed National Compliance Archives. Her filing systems had become a model adopted by several manufacturing groups. She still labeled everything with impossible precision. Grace volunteered twice a week, mentoring young inspectors. She often claimed retirement was less exhausting before people started asking for her advice. Owen had chosen a different path. He testified fully, accepted responsibility for his role, and completed a reduced sentence through cooperation. When he was released, he joined a nonprofit organization teaching cybersecurity ethics. "The easiest systems to hack," he once told a classroom of students, "are built by people who think they'll never be questioned." He never excused what he'd done. He simply spent the rest of his life making sure others didn't repeat it. That was enough. Not forgiveness. Growth. Sometimes the two looked remarkably similar. One rainy afternoon, Richard visited my office carrying a thick folder. "I have something for you." I accepted it. The cover read, "Final Investigation Report." I opened it slowly. Hundreds of pages. Engineering analyses. Witness statements. Financial audits. Photographs. Near the end, one paragraph caught my attention. Independent review concludes that the timely emergency shutdown prevented multiple fatalities. Original safety recommendations submitted by Chief Safety Engineer Ethan Carter were technically accurate and had been intentionally altered by senior management without authorization. Official. Permanent. The truth no longer depended on memory. It belonged to history. I closed the folder. I waited a long time to read that. Richard smiled. "You shouldn't have had to." Winter arrived quietly. Snow settled across the city in soft layers, muffling traffic and covering rooftops in white. The courthouse looked almost peaceful beneath the falling flakes. Victor Lang stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by 2 correctional officers. His appeals had failed. Every one of them. As they escorted him toward the transport vehicle, he noticed me waiting across the street. He asked the officers for 1 minute. After a brief hesitation, they allowed it. He walked toward me slowly. The confidence that had once defined him was gone. Not broken, simply exhausted. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally he asked, "Did you hate me?" "No." His forehead creased. "Not even after everything. I hated what your choices did." He looked down at the snow gathering around his shoes. "I told myself I was protecting the company. I know. I even believed it. I know." He laughed bitterly. "It sounds ridiculous now. It always was." He accepted the answer without argument. After a long silence, he asked the question I had expected since the day we met in the loading dock. When did you know? I looked at the gray winter sky. Long before you realized I did. He nodded slowly. I kept thinking you'd attack. I almost did. So why didn't you? Because if I had, I met his tired eyes. You would have spent the rest of your life believing I destroyed you. And instead, you destroyed yourself. Those words hung quietly between us. There was no triumph in them, only truth. One of the officers called Victor's name. He turned to leave, then stopped. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no desperate pleas for forgiveness. Just two simple words spoken by a man who had finally run out of excuses. I inclined my head once. Then he walked away. I never saw him again. That evening, I drove home along the river. City lights reflected across the water like scattered stars. For the first time since receiving a second life, I realized I wasn't comparing the present to the past anymore. The prison cell, the courtroom, the explosion, the betrayal. They no longer controlled every decision. Memory had become a teacher instead of a prison. I unlocked the front door. A shelf near the window held the brass telescope Luis's daughter had given me. Beyond the glass, the winter sky stretched clear and endless. Somewhere, children were looking at those same stars with curiosity instead of grief. Fathers were returning home after work. Factories were being inspected by people who understood that every signature represented lives instead of paperwork. I had been given a second life, not to rewrite every mistake, not to punish every betrayal, but to make one different decision when it mattered most. The rest had never required revenge, only consequences. And consequences, when left to the truth, had always known exactly where to find the guilty.